Fuck me. Hey, what's going on, everyone? My name's Harrison Turner, and welcome to my YouTube channel where I talk about music. I hope you've guessed that by this point. Put that away. Fuck! I get a shot of me readjusting myself so I'm back in position. That's better. Now let's redo that. Fuck. Fuck! There we go. Perfect. There we go. Excellent. Before getting into the video, I just want to talk about what this channel is going to be about. So it's not going to be this big review channel where I review all the new major releases. I might do reviews every once in a while, but that's not going to be like the big time commitment of this channel. I am a college student after all. I'm really just doing this for fun because I like talking about music. So I'll mostly do things like song and album analysis, talking about the latest news, maybe answering some questions, and then lists like this. For those of you who don't know me, I'm most well experienced with rock and metal. I do know about jazz and pop and hip hop and all these other various forms of music. However, I am by no means super knowledgeable or have very valid opinions on those genres. So, you know, I'll dip my toes in every once in a while, but mostly I'll just be sticking to my strengths. But who gives a shit about all that? This video is about one thing and one thing only. System of a Down is a very prevalent alternative / nu metal band of Armenian heritage, trust me, that's important, who had a pretty significant impact on the shape of the rock and metal scene of the early 2000s. They formed in 1994, their first studio album being released in 1998 in the form of their self-titled record. Between 1998 and 2005, the group has in total released 5 studio albums, and I'm going to be going across their entire studio discography and ranking them all from worst to best. Please keep in mind, this list is purely subjective, it's just my opinion. Feel free to express your opinions in the comments, agree, disagree, call me a dipshit, whatever you want. I'm happy to discuss my opinions with you guys. These albums range from good to great to masterpiece. These are totally arbitrary values. I just kind of like the sound of them. So let's just get into it. At the bottom of our list, we have the band's 2002 release, Steal This Album. Now, this isn't a bad album by any stretch of the imagination. There are plenty of great moments on this project worth mentioning. However, there are a few reasons that this album finds itself at the bottom of my list. Coming off the heels of the band's biggest release the year prior, System was definitely feeling the pressure to release as much music as possible to keep up the hype, something that happens to a lot of artists in a similar position to the band at the time. Steal This Album, in turn, suffers from the problem a lot of albums in its position face, in that it feels like it was just kind of an extended series of Toxicity afterbirths, which was further heightened by the whole Toxicity 2 pre-release debacle thing. In general, the songwriting isn't as concise and creative as Toxicity, but at the same time, it isn't as raw or manic sounding as the self-titled. The production is a little too muddy and overly compressed when considering the riffs they were writing, which is particularly notable in places like the outro and chorus of the track Inner Visions, a track which otherwise does feature a nice, tight verse riff and an enchanting vocal line. Here's to Square. On top of that, despite the jumbled together and slightly rushed nature of this album, it has 16 songs, which is more than any other album they've released, leading to the track listing being a little boring at points. Certain songs really do feel like not a lot of thought was put into them. The track Nuggins, I think that's how you say it at least, has this very odd riff that barely allows the vocal melody to fit in place, leading to a track which just overall isn't very catchy or fun. The song Ego Brain opens with this really weird folky guitar part and goes into a very underwhelming riff with some relatively corny lyrics slapped on top, at least corny by System of a Down standards. And I'm sorry, but every time I listen to the track Boom, I can't get over the BOOM! BOOM! You know, I'm in a dorm hall, and shouting that loud is probably not a very good idea. So I'm gonna stop. I don't know why I can't take that line in the same vein that I would take something like one of the lines from Bounce, but I really just can't get over it. However, even with its shortcomings, this album still has a lot going for it. Just like all their other albums, it flows really well from track to track. The vocal harmonies between Serge and Darren are excellent, and the album very promptly has a whole going against the establishment concept that they employ a lot in their music. There are tracks like Chicken Stew and IEIIAIO. No, I fucked that up. IEAIAIO. 2 tracks which, even though they are kind of silly in nature, are some of the strongest tracks lyrically that System has ever released, showing that the band is just as weird as they've ever been, while making a good point about advertising and corporate brainwashing of the general population. Roulette is a very pretty and melodramatic ballad with some really nice vocal melodies and guitar tracks, and songs like Pictures and Fuck the System are quick and throttling tracks that really just get the blood pumping. Get your
fucking pumped!
And it definitely feels like a bit of a throwback to the first album. So to sum up, while I do quite like this album, I feel it really just doesn't live up to the quality of the rest of the band's discography. It's just not as consistent, not as re-listenable, and at the end of the day, just not as memorable. I think the best thing I can say about this album is that it stands as a testament to the quality of System's discography, because despite being at the bottom of my list, it's a better record than a significant majority of albums that I've listened to. I'd say the two most notable tracks are the aforementioned IEA, IAO, and Fuck the System. Now that we're out of the good albums, yes, there was only one, the next album I want to talk about is Hypnotize, the first of the albums I would consider to be great. This album is the second of a double album series that the band released, the first of which being Mesmerize, and unless we've gotten some miracle release since the uploading of this video, this album stands as the final studio release that the band has put out. And even though it is this low on the list, I'd say this is a pretty strong send-off for the band. While the better tracks on this album are pretty much indistinguishable from those on albums higher on the list, that's where the biggest problem this album has becomes clear. In that while the album is full of these super high and almost orgasmic moments in the band's career, it also has some very underwhelming tracks. I think a big reason as to why this album is so inconsistent is because the band was trying to play around a lot more with the riffs and the vocal harmonies between Darren and Serge. While I think the vocal harmonies came out great for the most part, some of the riffs turned out pretty lame, honestly. It opens with the track Attack, which in my mind is the weakest opening the band has had. It's a really awkward verse, pre-chorus-ish part where the deliberate and almost operatic vocal descents are being doubled by this gross trem picking. The next track, Dreaming, features Darren playing this really thrashy riff with 3 different vocal parts overdubbing it, going all over the place. And while I appreciate the sound that the band was going for with this effect, it really just didn't come out that great. And overall, since this album was very Darren-centric as far as the writing is concerned, it's missing that visceral and blunt feeling of all the albums preceding it, yes, even Mesmerize. Not to say it doesn't have its intense moments. The track Vicinity of Obscenity, for example, opens with Shava playing this pretty catchy bass line over a very interesting drum rhythm, and then the track fucking 180s into one of System's weirdest, and that section's most brutal songs, and I mean that in the best of ways. The track You Fig, although having a kind of weak chorus section, also has one of my favorite System of a Down verse sections that's just gonna be super fucking pumped every time I hear it.
Come join the cause, come join the cause, who wants to come with me and come join the cause?
Have fun with that. That line is definitely a little in your face and has no sense of subtlety, but I am totally fine with that in the context of the song. On top of this, it's also worth mentioning that this is probably the band's saddest record to date, the last 2 tracks, Lonely Day and Soldier Side, being a particular note. And while I'm not really a fan of Lonely Day, Soldier Side never fails to give me goosebumps with its brooding and powerful lyrics about the relationship between soldiers and death in regards to pointless conflict. And that fucking chorus, man, that chorus. It's haunting in the most beautiful of ways. Despite this album's shortcomings, it's a solid record. There's no denying that. I still find it to be a very enjoyable listen. My 2 choices for this album are Soldier Side and Holy Mountains, a track I really didn't get to mention. Moving on to the third best album, I don't think this will come as much as a surprise to anyone considering the previous entry, but here we have the first of the band's double album series, Mesmerize. Interestingly enough, if you were to ask me what my favorite System record was about a year ago before I had a better understanding of both the band and music in general, I probably would have said this album. And just because it took a bit of a tumble doesn't mean I think any less of the album. I still think it's a fantastic record with a lot of memorable moments on it, and only 1 or 2 tracks that really don't live up to the band's standards. The main reason it finds itself here is that it just doesn't break that threshold. It doesn't have as much to offer as the next 2 entries on our list. It opens with the intro to the track Soldier Side off of Hypnotize, which was a really great way to bookend those albums together. This leads into one of the band's biggest singles, BYOB, a super fast and energetic track with very powerful anti-Iraq war imagery, representing the war as a party of some sort. The track Radio Video, while having very little lyrical substance, is probably one of the band's most underrated tracks in my humble opinion. It sees the band taking on this very strange, almost reggae metal infusion sound, and I'd be remiss to not mention the accelerating bridge solo section. I can't really describe how amazing it is. You'll just have to listen to it for yourself. To close the album, the track Lost in Hollywood talks about the alluring and almost siren-esque nature of Hollywood, dragging people in with its beauty only to prey on their hunger and kick them to the side once they're done with them. And there still are a lot of great tracks I haven't even mentioned, like Revenga, This Cocaine Makes Me Feel Like I'm on This Song, Sad Statue. However, the track listing is a little bogged down by the inclusion of songs like Violent Pornography and Old School Hollywood. The former of which, while being a decently strong track at points lyrically about the oversaturation of pornographic qualities in everyday life, such as in advertising and entertainment sponsored by Nabisco, it totally fails to deliver on the songwriting front, with just the most absolutely, positively boring fucking chorus System has ever written that removes any semblance of nuance to the lyrics at all. The latter, Old School Hollywood, features this really weird 80s synth thing that just feels super out of place and out of context in the record. And on top of the boring vocals, it kills what was a pretty decent riff at the core of the song. Considering this album is their shortest to date, it's only 11 tracks, those two songs stick out a little more than they would on an album like Toxicity. I feel like if the album were a little bit longer and or those two songs were reworked, this easily could have been in contention with the top System records, but it wasn't, and they weren't. So number 3 is a good place for this project. My two notable choices here are BYOB and Radio Video. And we finally moved on to Masterpiece Zone with the band's number 2 slot, the 1998 self-titled album. This is a very young System of a Down, and this is a very raw System of a Down. And there's no sugarcoating it, this album kicks ass. It's a pretty fucking bold freshman release. They pulled no punches here. The production, while it's honestly even muddier than Steal This Album's production, is a pretty good match for the super brutal riffs and vocals that the album employs as opposed to those on Steal This Album. The lyrics on this thing set the standard System formula of discussing things like conformity and war and the brainwashing of the public and American society. Going into the track list, the opening track, Sweet Pea, begins with the epitome of a perfectly weird riff that System has become known for.
The sky is good.
Then transitions in this banging ass metal track that talks about nothing short of pedophilia in the Catholic Church, and that really sets a strong impression for the band's career. The track Sugar has these batshit insane lyrics complemented by this amazingly fast-paced and aggressive flow, and there's this goofy stop-start pattern that throughout the verse and the main riffs that both perfectly complement and contrast the rest of the song. You have tracks like D-Devil and Pluck and War, the song I played a snippet of at the beginning of the video, that are all very standard but very effective metal tracks. D-Devil talks about plagiarism and the lack of creativity in the entertainment industry. Pluck talks about the oppression of the Armenian people from the Turkish government, and War discusses the true nature behind all wars being the lust for power of the upper class and the power hungry. Lastly, I want to talk about the track Spiders, which is one of the most beautiful tracks the band has ever released. Whenever I hear that bass intro, I just get all kinds of goosebumps. With all this in mind, there are a couple criticisms I can give the album. As good as the riffs are, a decent chunk of them, like Soil and Darts, really start to sound the same. The album isn't as diverse as pretty much any of their other projects, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. I mean, there are a lot of amazing albums that are in reality just the same song over and over and over again. However, this slight sense of repetitiveness is the main reason that this album isn't in the number 1 slot. With that said, it's a pretty minor point, honestly, and it doesn't really diminish the quality of this album, it just prevents it from reaching the top quality spot. If I were to suggest to someone who has never listened to System of a Down which album they should try first, I would probably recommend them this album. The 2 tracks I want to make mention of here are Sugar and Spiders. Number one goes to the band's 2001 release, Toxicity. We all saw this coming, we all thought it, no one's surprised, right? Good. With the first album being a very Surge-heavy record in terms of the writing, the band decided to split the writing between Surge and Darren, the 2 primary songwriters for the band. Overall, I think they're very good collaborators. They have strengths and weaknesses that are featured on other albums. However, this album almost exclusively combines their strengths in songwriting, and adding on top of that the performance capabilities of John and Chavo, it leads to quite possibly the most iconic and recognizable metal album of the 2000s. You have tracks like Prison Song and Deer Dance, which are some of the first examples of having this really intense track, with one caveat being the softer and more melodic bridge section, which is a formula I'm a pretty big fan of and System has employed a lot in their later discography. The title track, Toxicity, features one of Surge's best vocal lines to complement the powerful lyrics about the oversaturation of prescription medication in our society. And I can't mention this song without mentioning John's drum part, which is almost as iconic as the main guitar riff. For as fucking overplayed and memed as it is, Chop Suey is still one of the band's strongest tracks, with this beautiful triple guitar opening that leads into a track all about self-righteous suicide in regards to the struggles of people facing drug drug addiction and the overly zealous public's view on that. The track continues to build up until it erupts into this super beautiful and melodic and powerful ending that stands as one of the band's best performances. I could keep listing tracks off this album, like I haven't even mentioned the weirder songs like Jet Pilot or Bounce, another 2 great tracks, but doing that would just be redundant because at the end of the day, describing these songs boiled down to the simple idea that with this release, System of a Down was continuously poking and prodding at the boundary of where alternative metal could go. How aggressive can it be? How melodic can it be? How can we freak people the fuck out? The band just so masterfully weaves beauty, eccentricity, and brutality into almost each and every song in this album. And I know I've been using those words a lot in this video, but that's the best way to describe the band as a whole. They are a beautifully weird and brutal band. This album, for as amazing as it is, isn't 100% perfect. The track X has a kind of lame riff, and at points a really head-pounding drum part, but it's a short track, so it's really not that big a deal. And while I do like the song, Science is a little bit weak on the songwriting front, even though I'm a pretty big fan of the softer, heavily Armenian-inspired bridge section. With that in mind, I truly feel, at the bottom of my heart, that this album is the artistic peak of nu metal as a subgenre, at least from what I've heard. It only goes downhill from here, folks. 2 of the most notable tracks on here would have to be Deer Dance and the title track. And that's it. That's the end of my list. Thank you so much for watching. What'd you think about my ranking? Please be sure to leave your thoughts in the comments. You gotta keep in mind, I'm very new to this whole YouTube shit, so if you have any suggestions or you just want to make fun of me for being really bad at this, go for it. I don't really fucking care. But I'm looking forward to discussing with you guys. System of a Down has definitely become one of my favorite artists over the past couple years. I'd like to know what you guys have to say about them. If you liked the video, please be sure to subscribe. I'll upload video sometimes. If you want to keep up to date on when I'm releasing a video, be sure to follow me on Twitter, link in the description. Big thanks to Oliver for editing this video for me. You can find the links to his Instagram and Twitter in the description. Give him a follow. He's a funny guy. And yeah, that's about all I have to say. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.